Hello. Today we're here to talk about cannabis and specifically about bills C-45 and C-46. At Patients' Lives Matter, there's a great deal of this incoming legislation that concerns us not only in regards to patients, but as Canadians as a whole. For me personally, when we talk about the dangers and how we need to protect the public, and most specifically the children, I can't help but notice the mammoth-sized hypocritical elephant in the room when we talk about these sorts of things, especially when cannabis is the only time a legal drug that we actually pretend to care about these sorts of things. For example, we say things like, everybody reacts differently, the more you use, the more you need. Regular users can experience negative effects too. These sorts of side effects can include anxiety, the shakes, nausea, and in extreme amounts, vomiting, abdominal pain, altered sense of conscience, and even seizures in some cases. My mom warned me when I was a kid that I shouldn't rush to get addicted to anything, and that even though other people were doing it, it didn't mean that it was something that I needed to do too, at least not yet. Just to clarify for everybody, I'm talking about coffee and caffeine. Although, to be honest, it comes in all sorts of forms and varieties and concentrations, not limited to coffee, such as espresso, energy drinks, caffeine pills, and even powders. Some, in the case of energy drinks, one can even argue are marketed towards young people with their flashy designs and market logos. Between 1959 and 2017, there was 51 recorded deaths related directly to the ingestion of caffeine. This doesn't include the number of people who have died as a result of their actions while using this drug, such as a fatal car crash when someone was sipping their third espresso in the morning. These are strictly overdoses of caffeine. What's absolutely insane about the situation is that while 10 energy drinks in a day could put an adult into cardiac arrest, a teenager who would react much less than this could walk into a convenience store and buy a six-pack before work, and not even his teachers would stop him from drinking one per class that day. Why the caffeine lesson? The reason is simple: to illustrate the hypocrisy here in Canada. In 2013, Canadians drank roughly 3.4 kilograms worth of dry coffee per person, accounting for those who drink more and those who drink less. It's a fairly normal and regular thing to do here in Canada. In some cases such as Tim Hortons branded coffee and donuts, it's almost accepted as a rite of passage for Canadians. Something that in excess can and does cause health issues in the general population, ranging from minor intolerable to serious heart problems and even death in the most extreme cases. We can't forget the burden that these clinic and hospital visits pose on the already taxed healthcare system. Doctors don't work for free and patients don't pay on these visits. The taxpayers end up paying the bill there. But we don't bat an eye at it because it's just coffee related. The irony here is that we're all worried about cannabis and the supposed effects that it can cause to individuals or even society as a whole, when by comparison it seems that caffeine is actually the worst of the two and it's not even a close call. There's been 0 deaths related to the ingestion of cannabis ever. In fact, when used properly, cannabis can actually relieve most of the side effects that are produced by the consumption of caffeine or even sugar without creating additional ones in the process. Like caffeine, cannabis is available in a wide variety of forms and derivatives, such as the flower and bud that we all know, ranging up to the concentrates, edibles, and consumables like capsules and tinctures. The only products available in the legal market on October 17th are flower and basic oils. This leaves a very large portion of the market who currently consumes cannabis, both recreationally and medicinally, going through illegal underground sources in order to obtain the products that they've already become accustomed to. As long as people are wanting something, there will be someone there who is willing to provide it to them if their government won't. I was under the impression that this is why we were legalizing in the first place, but I digress. The reality here is that while we're eliminating the black market, etc., by legalizing and restricting, they've actually done very little legalizing at all. In fact, while they may have legalized certain aspects of cannabis, they've actually created a lot more criminal crimes surrounding cannabis than there ever were before. The contrast in how the government plans to restrict cannabis use and penalize those who use this supposedly legal product outside of their approved rules and compared to other similar yet more dangerous regulated products is undeniably absurd. As adults, we don't need the government playing the role of mother and father to this extent. The previous point about coffee illustrates this point quite clearly. For example, most jurisdictions across the country used to treat an offender caught smoking a joint as the least of their worries and usually not worth the paperwork. They would see the joint stepped on and destroyed and be on with their night. This will now result in a mandatory fine up to $500, where the same situation replaced with an open container of alcohol is still treated as a verbal offense, a verbal warning in most cases. Another example of how incredibly short-sighted this government has been in regards to policing the public in an apparent attempt to protect them is the nanogram limit for drivers. Medical and other users could easily consume on a Friday and test positive at a stop on Monday. For a great majority of Canadians, they should no longer drive or otherwise face extremely harsh consequences ranging from fines to permanent losses of their driver's license. Having 2 to 5 nanograms per 1 milliliter of blood is punishable by a summary criminal conviction and a fine of up to $1,000 on a first offense. Having more than 5 nanograms is considered a hybrid offense that can be dealt with by way of criminal conviction, a fine, as well as incarceration. Understanding that the average Canadian isn't a scientist or even someone who's looked into how much it takes for 1 nanogram to be present in someone's blood, I'll try and put it another way. The World Anti-Doping Agency that oversees the testing for Olympic athletes recently changed its threshold for positive THC tests. Up until very recently, if 15 nanograms were present in a return test, it was taken as a positive test and the person in question would be disqualified and suspended. This is already more than the 2 to 5 nanogram range for a positive test that would criminalize a person caught driving under the influence here in Canada. A new threshold has been set recently of 150 nanograms per milliliter. The reasoning for this was the admittance that cannabis is not necessarily an enhancer. It's not going to enhance an ability of an athlete. However, the general public can agree that you don't want a bobsledder flying around at 200 kilometers an hour under the influence of intoxicating substances. This is a valid point and a very level-minded approach. Their intent is to catch people who have consumed on-site prior to the events and not those who use in the off-season or weeks leading up to these events. Cannabis is not technically banned for use in athletes' free time, subjected to their own national laws. If this committee, who is world-renowned for their strictness of testing athletes on a global stage, can recognize that the low limit of 15 nanograms is ruining the lives of people not actually intoxicated, why can the government not see reason and use common sense to approach to a situation that they claim they want to fix? If anything, they've made things significantly worse for drivers across Canada who use cannabis. Instead of protecting Canadians from the criminal justice system, Trudeau's government will see more people arrested and formally charged than Stephen Harper's ever could have hoped to have seen. Speaking of criminalization, what's happening with the current dispensaries is not only despicable, but absolutely disappointing. What reasonable body of government could see something being done across the country for years and think that they could close it down and just do it better with no experience? How would you feel if somebody declared your job invalid, something you've been doing for years? They walk right in and tell you that you have no more right to do the things that you've been doing, and better yet, if you try to do it again, they'll throw you in jail for up to 14 years. On top of that, you see that they plan to open up the exact same businesses you have, and just expect you to sit down and accept that? Rather than work with the current market that's already in place, they'll proceed to spend hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars fighting the dispensary and the market currently in place. That's something that the provincial government under Kathleen Wynne had proposed, and there's no word from the incoming Ford party as to exactly what his plans are. I can only imagine the farce that this province will become in regards to its legal cannabis industry if they proceed without both the private and the government businesses. The federal shops could stand to learn something from the ones with experience on the front line, and to argue that point or ignore that is absolutely a bold-faced lie. Finally, the ludicrousness of being able to purchase something that you can hardly actually legally consume needs to be addressed. While it may be legal on paper to consume cannabis, the great majority of people around the country won't be able to afford themselves this luxury. Those who rent, the great possibility that their landlords will either legally alter their lease to include a clause for cannabis, or they'll enforce the no smoking that was on the lease anyways. Those with neighbors won't be able to consume in their backyards, as the smell is considered a nuisance and punishable by fines should anybody complain or be bothered by it. It's also forbidden to smoke in the general public, and currently, lounges are forbidden as well for various reasons. Where exactly does this government expect its people to consume this product legally if you need to own your own property to do so at this point? Only private residences will be allowed for consumption of cannabis, and the average smoker doesn't own their own home. I never imagined a day would come where my government could slap me in the face and there wasn't a thing I could do about it. There's also the disadvantaged and even homeless. There won't be if they weren't harassed for smoking the odd joint here and there before, they most certainly will be now. When we as activists complain about C-45 and C-46, it's not just to hear ourselves speak, or to try and find something to fight for. We also don't disagree that Bill C-45 is a monumental piece of legislation and a moment that will go down in the history books. Some may even say that it's a great first step, and while I'm inclined to agree to a certain extent, we cannot ignore the shortcomings in these bills, particularly the ones that continue to criminalize the thousands who have fought and continue to fight for the liberation of this plant and the people who consume it. Not only does this list now include growers, patients, bud tenders, and everybody else involved in the current industry, but it now also includes the average Canadian who chose to start consuming cannabis instead of alcohol every night, for example. That healthier choice just made their life a lot harder. Let's not kid ourselves into thinking the government really has the children's best interest at heart, let alone the best interest of the average Canadian when it comes to recreational cannabis. The rules aren't equal for everyone by a long shot. Legalization, as they've labeled it, echoes the same issues that prohibition had and is simply being rewritten to fill the pockets of profiteers rather than actually legalizing it. If I can purchase but not use said products, how legal is it really? If I had to choose between my driver's license and using cannabis, how legal is it really? If a product needs to be regulated to a point as to discourage people from actually using it, how legal is it really? And if it's illegal for the people who fought through civil disobedience to sell cannabis in the exact same dispensaries that the government plans to open, how legal is it really? I'm tired of my government blowing smoke up my ass. You should be too.